Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me virtually for the presentation of Engineering a Financial Plan, Measure Twice, Cut Once. Just want to say, to begin with, just a big thank you. We're recording this in February of 2025. And for those of you who don't know, this is our 25th anniversary year as a practice at Piton Wealth. And so one thing that we wanted to point out is our practice has been built on the engineering and scientific community for all 25 of those years. So we wanted to start off this presentation with just a big thank you to the engineering community. Also, I just wanted to kind of give you a quick insight into where this presentation was born. And Michelle Clary, the other advisor in our office here in Piton and Kennewick and CEO, founder of Piton, we were sitting at a industry conference with Thrivent Advisor Network. And one of the presentations was on financial planning analysis. And so we were listening. I was listening along to this speaker who was from one of the companies that works for, I think, a financial planning company that offers financial planning software. And the presentation struck me because it was much more technical and analytical than many of the other presentations you encounter at these events. And so as I was sitting there thinking about that presentation, two things crossed my mind pretty quickly. And one was you could put 100 engineers and scientists in this room and they would love it. There was spreadsheets, there was data, there was graphs, there was analysis, there was studies and peer-reviewed research. And so I just thought it was kind of a fun, different presentation that many of our clients would have enjoyed hearing. The second thing that struck me was we have been doing all of the things in that presentation that he was explaining for many years, because naturally over those 25 years, we've developed specializations, one of which is the engineering and scientific community. And again, it's probably nothing that we've done. More importantly, it's what the scientists and engineers that we work with have required of us over the years, which is to hold ourselves to a strict fiduciary standard, back up recommendations with evidence, and show the data that's behind the scenes. And so for a long time, we've operated under this assumption and designed our processes and our systems around that type of system. So, why do we specialize as engineers? Well, we think we're good at it. We think we know how to do it. We know how information is often well received by these groups. We offer a fiduciary service. And for the last 25 years, we've been serving this group or these groups of people for a long time. And so we're very excited to kind of share some of the behind the scenes things that go into that planning process with you today. By the way, just one other fun fact before we get going, and just worth mentioning, is that we actually also have 2 engineers on our team, and those team members who don't have an engineering degree probably comprise about 2/3 of their family members are engineers. So we have a long lineage and history with engineers and scientists, and we're looking forward to showing you the similarities between what you guys do and what we do, and how we think we can offer a comprehensive advice strategy for you guys in a manner that we think you would like to hear it. Okay, before we get going, just a little bit of disclosure we wanted to just go through with you. I'll leave it on the screen here so you can read it. Since you're watching virtually, you can pause it and you can even read through it then. But essentially, this is saying we're not attorneys nor accountants. Rules that we talk about tonight, today, dates that change, rules and regulations change. We might bring things up. Depending on when you're viewing this, they may not be relevant at the time you're viewing it. So you may want to always consider just getting a second opinion on whether that's still valid. Also, this presentation contains opinions, and there's multiple strategies that may or may not be relevant to you or your individual situation. We just strongly recommend that you analyze your own specific strategy before implementing based on some of the things we talk about today. Okay, so a rather unusual beginning to a financial planning conversation. And for those of you who live in Washington, you probably know what this picture is representing, or you probably heard about the story. But today, what I'm going to attempt to do is to make the case that there's lots of important technical decisions and strategies that we can use in financial planning. But what's important and what I'm going to focus on today is less about those specifics and more about how we analyze and interpret the data. Okay, so again, this is not a textbook class about Roth conversions or qualified charitable distributions or required minimum distribution ages, or what IRS regulations came into play and have since gone. This is what data are we analyzing when we do a comprehensive financial plan, when we're offering fiduciary advice. How do we interpret that data? How do we gather it? How do we come up with the end recommendations that shape that bigger picture? And so again, a bit of an unusual introduction with a bridge collapsing. So this is, of course, as it says on the screen, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge and the famous collapse of 1940. Why is this important? Why is this on the screen? Building a bridge, believe it or not, is much like building a financial plan. It requires a solid foundation. It needs to last a long time. By nature, bridges are built in high-risk areas, not dissimilar to the various risks that we face when we talk about our own finances. We need to factor in future needs, i.e., in the case of a bridge, traffic, vehicle size and weight. It's not going to be the same as it was in 1940 as it is now. Are we building a plan where the structure is capable of adapting to future needs? And so I think I can speak for my clients when I say that at the end of the day, they expect that we take our job seriously and understand that just like a bridge, the financial plan that we're helping you build, it has severe consequences if it doesn't go to plan, and we need to take that seriously as a financial advisor. So why is this story a good one to review? Well, I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of research I did regarding this bridge collapse and kind of where this story came from. So the collapse of the 1940 Tacoma Narrows Bridge, right, in the words from the website where this record, the history is notated, it stunned everyone, especially engineers. The work was completed in July 1940, and it was the third longest suspension bridge in the world at the time. And the question that they asked when it collapsed is, how could the most modern suspension bridge with the most advanced design suffer catastrophic failure in what was considered to be relatively light wind? In March 1941, the Carmody board announced its findings. Random action of turbulent wind caused the bridge to fail. Okay, and three key points stood out. Not tremendously important to the overall picture, but just worth going through. So the principal cause of the 1940 collapse was its excessive flexibility. The solid plate girder and deck acted like an aerofoil, creating drag and lift. And aerodynamic forces, this one's important, were little understood, and engineers needed to test suspension bridge designs using different models, potentially in a wind tunnel, in a different environment. And so we're going to come back to this story mostly at the end, but maybe referencing it throughout the presentation. But so just I want you to keep in mind as we go through this, that analogy of the similarity between building a bridge and building a well-structured, comprehensive financial plan. Okay, so for some light amusement before we get going, maybe not for these people on the bridge, and I don't know if this image is real. I'm assuming it is. What are some other examples, all right, when we define financial planning of why financial planning can go wrong, what we're really trying to attain? So in this scenario, right, lack of communication. Maybe it's with your spouse, maybe it's with your parents, maybe we should be asking more questions. Maybe we should pause the recording and go get our spouse after seeing this so they can come join us. One thing I will say is usually one spouse in every relationship is more involved with the finances. That doesn't mean we want to disclude them from planning. I'm going to simply leave this question lingering. Let's say you were digging a hole. Are you willing to dig a hole for 20 to 30 years without asking the question, what size of the hole should I be digging? Where should I be digging? What is the purpose of the hole that I'm digging? Or would you go out with a shovel and just keep digging for 20 or 30 years in the hope that somebody would come and tell you when the right time to stop digging was, or that you're in the wrong place, right? We spend a long time, 20 to 30 years, maybe more of our life, preparing for retirement, right? Are we absolutely certain that we're saving in the right place, that we're digging in the right place? Are we using the right tools? And are we digging to the right depth, right? Are we even in the right direction? Because that's what many of us are doing, is we're spending 20 to 30 years of our life preparing for retirement. And what we don't want to get in the way is a lack of communication. Okay, just another tidbit before we get going. This is one of my favorites. I call it the classic overachiever. And I'm almost sure, Fire, in my meetings with clients, that there are some years when we'll say, there's not much to do, right? We just need to keep saving, or we need to keep on the spending plan we've already established. We need to determine, are there any other things coming up in the future? But if not, sometimes, and I'll say this, sometimes that's okay, right? Then maybe we don't have a lot to do right now. In this case, right, you can see the classic overachiever has taken a goal of building stairs from the bottom floor to the top floor, and he's overachieved, by the way, creating either some complexity of physically getting from point A to point B. Maybe he misunderstood the assignment, or maybe like myself at home, he's a bit of a tinkerer, right? And he just tinkered one too many times. But either way, it resulted in something too complicated. One of the things that I find particularly fascinating, and I think it's so simple in its nature, but so misunderstood, is the act of complicating something is a surefire way to ensure most people just don't do it. And so a good financial plan, just again, a tidbit here before we get going, a good financial plan should be ready to adapt to complexity, but it should seek to be simple by nature. Otherwise, the chances are we're probably not going to get around to doing it or want to do it. Okay, lastly, again, just adding a little bit of humor, hopefully, just another type of personality that we encounter, or a strategy that we encounter, and it's a classic. That will do for now, right? I'll give this person credit, points for creativity, but maybe not exactly what we had in mind for our long term. How many times do we say, that'll work for now, or I'll come back and fix that later. For now, I'm just going to tinker and just going to get it to work. Often, not always, but often, by the time somebody gets serious about planning, there is an accumulation of band-aids, much like this, that have to be addressed, and in some cases have to be addressed very quickly before they become a problem. My advice is to tackle it early. Don't let the list of fixes get too big before we address it. Okay, so to remind you, my goal is not to tell you what your number is for retirement, how much money you need for retirement right now today. That's something we discuss in the conference room once we've seen the data. But what I do want to do is help expand and show you what a well-rounded, comprehensive financial plan looks like. So it may make sense to start with, what is financial planning and what does it look like? Well, before we even do that, let's start with what it's not. It's not selling a product or a service. It's not buying a product or a service, right? Going online and buying something. That's maybe something that you might need to do at some point in your life, but that's not what comprehensive financial planning is. It's not one solution to one problem. It's an accumulation of information that takes into consideration a collection of variables, and it helps you organize the data and those variables into a cohesive path so that you can reach one or more of your goals efficiently. Recently, just an example of this, right? We delivered around 60 boxes of charcuterie to local businesses, and along with just thank you cards to some of the people in the industry, attorneys, accountants that we work with regularly. Maybe some of you watching this got a charcuterie box from us. We delivered it to about 20 engineering firms. One of the issues when you have that many deliveries is finding the best route. That means you don't have to go, you don't want to go back on yourself. You don't want to have to go to one city to go back to another, to go back there again in the afternoon, right? You want to make that delivery path as streamlined as possible. Essentially, a simple form of planning, right? I have multiple goals, multiple deliveries. There's lots of different routes I can take. There's traffic, there's construction, there's timing differences, and I want to take one. I want to take the best one. So which of those routes is going to allow me to do that in the quickest manner, the most efficiently, and adapting to the different things that are going on in that surrounding area. So luckily, I'll just give you a heads up here. There is apps for this. Your phone does it fairly well too. So we managed to solve that problem. But the concept and the analogy is pretty similar to financial planning as well. And so that's our goal with comprehensive financial planning. It's lots of things wrapped into one to give you the best possible solution, even though there might be multiple that we can't choose from. Okay, so for those of you who work with an advisor already, or those of you that may decide to work with one in the future, maybe you do or don't right now, this is just a point of reference that I wanted to point out to you. How do you increase your chances of finding the right person to guide you through this process? This is something we're not all experts in. So how do you find that right advisor, that right team to help walk you through this? It's not the only factor, but it's certainly a large component. The CFP designation, it's a good sign, right? Certified Financial Planning Designation. Just some highlights here. The designee, so the person who's attaining it or attained it, they must complete a comprehensive coursework load, prior to even sitting for exams. So kind of similar to an undergraduate degree. The designee must have passed the 6-hour comprehensive final exam and 6,000 plus hours of professional experience, not including the time invested in studying, but 6,000 hours of professional experience related to the financial planning process and field also must be attained before you can use the designations. Again, it's not the only factor, but it's one we point out because it's something we've taken seriously here at Piton. To become a Piton Wealth Advisor on our team, you must have a minimum of 5 years experience in the field and have attained the Certified Financial Planner designation as a minimum expectation before you can be giving advice to clients and call yourself an advisor. So all of our advisors are equipped to give this comprehensive advice, and they're good quality financial advice. So, just something to look out for. One more thing, that I want to mention before we dive in to probably some of the material you're here to hear about is just context so that you understand what you're looking at, because again, some of this is very industry specific. But this is also one really, really important aspect that you can take with you and apply it to multiple areas of your life. We just do it in the financial planning world, and it's following the process. So what's on your screen is Navigated Journey. That is a Piton Wealth patented process that we deploy with clients every single year that we do financial planning. And the reason is following the financial planning process is extraordinarily important, yet very, very easy to start pulling away from once you've been doing it for a long time. And so the critical part to this is we have a defined process, and we're actually going to lay the slides out as such as how we would go through this process. But we have it for a reason. What we know is if we find that, maybe clients come to us and their advisor or their person they used to work with has made mistakes, and that's what they're coming to us to fix. 9 times out of 10, it's probably because they skipped a step in the process, or they did have a process and they just didn't use it, or maybe even as far as they just didn't have a process when they were designing their financial plan. And so we know that mistakes are made when the process isn't followed. Doesn't mean we can't stray throughout the process just to get the best result, but we have some core items within that we want to stick to. So the first one of that, first step of that process that we call, it's the Discover appointment. Again, I'm going to skip through some of these a little quicker, but it's data gathering, it's draft reviewing, it's updates, it's getting to know you. It's really getting in the weeds of what are our goals, what are our objectives. So how do we do that? Okay, this is, again, kind of the point where we're going to really dive into the process of what goes into a financial plan. This one, presuming you're an engineer or a scientist, you will have no problem understanding quantitative data, right? It's numbers. It's ones and zeros. And so what does that look like in the financial planning world, though? Right? It looks like this that's on your screen right now. It's a comprehensive net worth statement. It's kind of the core of any advice that has to be given. You can't really give good advice unless you know all of the moving parts. You can't really give holistic advice unless you can see the big picture. So what do we spend the first, 5 to 10 hours of our financial planning process doing? It's working with the clients to get pension estimates, running multiple scenarios so we know ranges. It's even if the account is very, very small when it's got $100 in it, we want to know about it because it's important. It might factor in somewhere else. We want to know about any type of account that has a payout in the future, a death benefit, or any type of value. We want to include it in this comprehensive net worth statement because even sometimes the smallest of accounts can be a disruptor or a flag for the IRS that we didn't want to encounter, or just something that we don't want to forget about. We want to consolidate. We want to have this system built out. How do we do that? Just so you know, we have a document checklist we send to clients. We schedule a document drop-off appointment with clients where they bring the documents in. We have a team member sit down with them and go through line by line, making sure they're not missing things like interest rates, things like maturity dates, things like inception date. We're looking at registration. Who's the owner? Has the registration changed? We're asking lots of questions, and really the key to quantitative data is detail. So, once we've got that behind us, and again, not a small feat, still 5 to 10 hours maybe worth of work there. Would it surprise you to know this is where most people stop? And I think it surprises me, yet I can see why they do it. What they're missing in most cases is the qualitative data, right? Why do most people not go there? Because it's difficult to interpret qualitative data or things. Go back to the bridge scenario from the beginning. Nowhere in the report did the commission that studied the failure, the collapse, say that the engineers just measured wrong. Whoever it is who went and took the numbers, they just got the wrong numbers. There was nothing about that. What they did highlight was a lack of understanding of the environment that they were building in. And one of the most missed components is qualitative data. Okay, so again, what I'm going to try and lay out to you is how we capture that, why it's important, and what we do with it. So one of the ways we capture it is with questions, right? This is an example of one of the questions that we would ask. If we were meeting here 3 years from today, what needs to have happened for you both personally and professionally for you to feel happy with your progress? Might seem like a simple question, yet a lot of the questions we're asking, they're simple, yet they highlight a specific goal in mind for us, right? And they also kind of frame the next steps of the financial planning process in a way for clients that we want it to be framed. So things like this question, although it seems simple, it's setting realistic goals, right? It's setting realistic timeframes. It's not saying the next 30 years, it's 3 years. It's leading us to smaller actions that we think we know we need to take to reach those goals over the next short period of time. We've got time later to talk about the future. Just an example there of qualitative data. Another example that's fairly new to us, actually. We spent a long time preparing this and designing it. So for clients, if you're watching and you've been a client of Michelle's for 25 years or a client of mine for 8 or 9 years, you may not have seen this. You may have only recently seen this. Ask our team about it if you haven't, but it's something that we had in our vision for a long time and we brought to life about a year ago. Maybe a little bit longer. And so what this is, we call it the Wheel of Wellness. Okay, and this is our attempt at quantifying qualitative data. And so again, without spending tremendous amounts of time on this, what it is a wheel with 1 through 5, 1 being on the middle, 5 being on the outside. And it's a way that we can put something in front of clients to say, how satisfied are you with these areas of your life? And taking something that's traditionally difficult to quantify and trying to quantify it. And what our attempt is to create a visual representation for the clients and something that we can include with data to back up why we're recommending something in the end plan. And so our goal, right, is that a client should have a very, very consistent or a fairly consistent circle, hopefully on the outer edge, meaning they're very satisfied in multiple areas of their life. What we're looking for is somebody who's either very unsatisfied in lots of areas or maybe just very unsatisfied in one or two specific areas, because those are probably the ones we need to work on. One quick point to here is that right now I'm reading a book that is on longevity. The name will come back to me. But one of the things they point out with centenarians is people who live to 100 years or older, that so much of our world has been designed around increasing longevity, except we haven't spent a long time studying or understanding the quality of life aspect. So as an example, are we spending so much of our time preparing for a 65 retirement, yet are we in a high risk category for a heart attack or high cholesterol or other things that would possibly interfere with that, or would counter what our goal is? And so, likewise, maybe if we're estimating that we can't retire till 67, yet we're deeply unsatisfied in our job, then maybe a better solution might be to work a little bit longer or find an alternative job that's actually possible to work that many years at, rather than experiencing burnout prior, right? Which again happens quite often in our industry, where we plan on something and then people come in many, many years before that and say, I just can't do it. I just want to go and retire. I don't know if I can keep doing this job. Well, if we can identify that 10 years before that burnout hits, maybe we're saving ourselves a headache down the road. And then what's the last step, of this quantitative, qualitative data gathering process that we go through? Again, scientists, engineers, you'll understand this, is defining the parameters, right? We look at the different categories that we can adjust in retirement: risk management, retirement age, behavioral habits, asset types, and we set ourselves some parameters of what are the negotiables, what are the non-negotiables, what areas can we adjust and tweak. Is our budget currently tight? Do we need to increase our income? Is our budget working great? Are we saving enough money that we can maybe look at retiring earlier? Where are those walls around the plan that we want to build, so that at the end of the day, as an advisor, we're giving good advice, not unrealistic advice or advice that you didn't want. Sometimes we have to have hard conversations about something someone wants, but it's not realistic. But the last thing we want to be doing is recommending an age 70 retirement for somebody who had always planned on an age 62 retirement. We might need to talk about that, but where are those rules? Where are the parameters? Okay, so this takes us to our second step in the financial planning navigated journey process, the design step. This is solid numbers. We've got a much better handle on the data. We've made several assumptions based on the parameters we set. Now we're laying out the general path, right? We can still take shortcuts. We can still adjust the route. But are we heading in the right direction? What does that look like? What are some things we can do today? So the way I'm going to pose this to you is in the context of single dimensional analysis versus multi-dimensional analysis. Okay. And again, I'll explain this as we go through, but this is critical in this second step, because this is what differentiates a okay financial plan, one that works, but isn't really built for the future, right? It's the 1940s bridge that's built to serve the 1940s community, versus a multi-dimensional analysis approach, which is the bridge that they build bigger, wider, stronger, knowing that trucking is going to become a bigger industry, the city's growing, more traffic is going to be needed, and that bridge is around for 100 years. And those are really the differences between these two approaches. And so that's one thing that I just want to expand on as we go through and just help you understand as we click through the next slides. Okay, so what's an example that most people see fairly regularly if you log in to your 401k at work, I'll say, of a single dimensional analysis and conclusion, okay? And what you're seeing on your screen is not a client's particular account. It was just off of the internet. It's just an example of what every client, when they bring their statement into us and show us what their 401k performance is or what investments are in there, it usually includes something like this, and it says, how are you doing? Are you on track for retirement? Here's how much money you could spend in retirement. Here's how much we would estimate you should save, if you want to spend $1,000 more. And, here's your target increase over the next 10 years. It's quite a detailed conclusion, considering it has very few variables going into it, right? It has how much you contributed. Maybe it has the taxation of those assets, whether it's a Roth 401k or a pre-tax 401k. And really, that's about it. It has two components. What are you putting in and how is it taxed? It doesn't know how much you spend. It doesn't know if you have a family of 12 or if you have a family of one or no family. It doesn't factor in if your parents are Bill and Melinda Gates or whether they're, still working at 85. It has no idea what your life is like. It has no idea of your other financial situations, whether this is a small part of your part or whether this is a big part. Yeah, it kind of uses its tools at its disposal to spit out a conclusion. So this is an example of single dimensional conclusions, right, gone wrong. We can't rely on just this single variable analysis. So what are some good examples of single dimensional analysis? And then how do we use it? Okay, so some good examples of single dimensional analysis are pension plans and pension analysis. Yes, we want to bring it back into the fold later when we're doing analysis on cash flow. Yet, most of the time, pensions have a set formula. They have a set date at which it makes sense to start. I wouldn't imagine there's many people out there who could receive a full benefit at 65 and say, I just want to do the company a favor and I want to take my benefit at 70, right? Just because I can save maybe a little bit of money in taxes. So single dimensional analysis can be used for something like a pension analysis, and it can get complicated, right? There's all sorts of different options. There's lump sum, there's lifetime, there's single payout, there's 10-year guaranteed payouts for a lifetime. So you get a guaranteed payout for 10 years, but your portion continues for a lifetime. On the screen here, you can see there's a list of options there. There's a list of benefits. There's a list for a spouse or a survivor or a beneficiary and what their benefit would be. But at the end of the day, pension analysis, the first step is to complete what is your benefit? When is the optimal time to take it? And 9 times out of 10, that's what we're going to go with, right? We just need to factor in other things around that. Again, another good example of single dimensional analysis, right? Social Security. What you're seeing on the screen is the optimal time for somebody to take Social Security based on a break-even analysis, right? And we have programs that can do this. You can run this in a spreadsheet, right? We factor it in, again, later down the road to the cash flow because that can have varying differences, and we'll explain that. But at its core, right, Social Security has a break-even point depending on whether you take it at age 62, which is the first year you're eligible, or whether you take it at 70. And again, just a good golden rule. Again, I haven't heard many people, anybody say they want to wait on Social Security. And even though that's the most benefit they're going to get, they're going to wait past 70, right? 70 is the maximum benefit as it currently stands. That's when people take it. But the question we get is, what happens if I take it earlier, right? What happens if my spouse has an income or a Social Security payout that's much, much less than mine? Should they take theirs early, right? Should he or she take theirs at a different time than me? What happens if theirs is higher than mine? When should I take mine and when should they take theirs? So there is a multi-facet, multi-variable approach that we need to build in. You'll see in the next slide, right? We also factor in things like taxes. It isn't unusual that, let's say you take somebody who's single and they're still working and they want to take their Social Security, or they come to us and they've already started Social Security, but they're still working, or they go back to work. Well, we've got to factor in taxes, right? In an ideal situation, we wouldn't want to start Social Security while we're working because there may be tax issues. There may be a higher tax rate we're susceptible to, or there may be even penalties for doing that. A dollar for dollar penalty is one that comes to the top of my mind. But we want to start with just plugging in the raw data. We want to do a single dimensional analysis, and we want to look at where that break-even point is for each person who comes in to see us, each couple. We want to run both numbers simultaneously. So you can kind of see in this chart, there is a straight line of the benefit, and then there's a green line which shows if that person had waited, so not taken it early at 62, but waited till later, right, where that break-even point is. Anything below the blue line means the person was better off taking it early. Anything above the blue line, where that green line is, means they were actually better off if they had waited. And so we'll run that type of analysis. Again, these programs are out there, they exist. But it's what really comes after that is most important. Like I mentioned, again, tax analysis, the reason why this falls into the single dimensional analysis camp is most of the tax planning you'll be used to doing is, and it's fair, right, is on an annual basis, right? What is my tax rate this year? And that has a place in financial planning. Absolutely. We want to minimize taxes in the most amount of years possible. What you'll see is all three of these examples as an example, all three of these examples plus the ones that are still to come, they all have a place in multi-dimensional analysis. They all work together in some bigger harmony, but they all have a legitimate place in running a single variable and trying to find the best approach to solving that. Tax analysis is no different, right? I'm in a high tax bracket this year. I got a bonus. I had a big payout. I'm in a high capital gains tax year. Should we look at charitable tax bundling? Should we look at doing some renovations and getting some energy efficient credits this year? We've been meaning to do it anyway. This is a great year to do it. Should we do some various other strategies like max out 401ks where we weren't originally planning to in the pre-tax bucket? What can we do to solve the tax problem today? Those are things we look at. Absolutely got a place. We also want to plan for the long term, but they have a place in single dimensional analysis. Lastly, this one is mainly in here because not a lot of people know about this. This is a prime example of single dimensional analysis at its core because a lot of people never see this, and it's a complicated structure on how they do this. They actually base your Medicare premium on your income from 2 years ago. And although as an advisor, we are looking ahead at future years to see what might be happening, we also are keenly aware that this is one of the most common things to throw people off of their game when their Social Security benefit goes down or their Medicare premium goes up and they don't know why. And so we run this type of single dimensional analysis towards the end of a year, looking to see where clients are at. Is there anything we can do to adjust that? Worst case scenario is we're over by a little bit, but maybe it's an unavoidable little bit. Maybe we're over this particular Medicare modified adjusted gross income bracket by $50, right? And our premium now is increased by $70 a month plus Part D by $13 a month. So that $50, is costing us $1,000 over a year. Yes, it's not fun. Maybe it's unavoidable. Maybe just by running that single dimensional analysis, we can do an extra charitable contribution. We can harvest some losses in the portfolio. We can get you under there. Again, single dimensional analysis has its place. Just remember that the limitations are usually very short term. All of those scenarios that we looked at, they're very much one problem, one solution scenarios, but they all have a place in the bigger picture. So what does that bigger picture look like? Okay. And I could probably tell you that we could go into, again, that the individual strategies on tax planning, the individual strategies on charitable planning, on Medicare, on retirement funding and different tax allocations. We could go into diversification. We could go into Social Security analysis, and we could be here for about 5 to 10 hours just talking about some of those really cool strategies that help us when we run those scenarios. But just a reminder, what I want to do is show you what it looks like so that you know what a comprehensive financial plan really is. I think that's the most important goal for today. So what does it look like when we take those single dimensional analysis approaches and we roll it into something that's comprehensive, right? One of those tools that we use to do this, it's called a Monte Carlo analysis. What this does is it factors in multiple variables, right? All of the different things we talked about. When you start Social Security, when you want to retire, what the inflation rate we're expecting it is to be, what average return, or maybe even what specific return we want to shoot for is. It might be, are we receiving an inheritance? Are we selling our house in retirement? It runs a variety of different variables into one comprehensive financial plan. And the Monte Carlo analysis then takes that data and it runs it 1,000 different ways, repeats the process with different variables. 1 year it's good returns, it's trending upwards returns. 1 year it's a negative 25% return. In the first year you retire, how would the portfolio react? It runs a variety of these scenarios, about 1,000, I believe, to come up with a chance of success of the plan running until a desired age, right? Might be life expectancy. We often use 100 because it gives us wiggle room. It gives us a more conservative approach to financial planning. But it looks at these types of assumptions and it says, hey, look, everything you've told me, everything you've plugged into the program, the decisions you've made, this is the chance of success. This is what that would look like. What that does, right, is that gives us the ability to chart out maybe several different scenarios and say, what makes sense for us? One of the things that I just really want to encourage you is the goal is not to end with a certain dollar amount per se, right? I think what I hear the most is people say, if I could die with $1, right, that would be fantastic. Maybe that's the goal, but we don't know. I mean, I think that's a hard standard, and I think most people say it humorously. But what we can do is we can look at things and the scenarios that we lay out, and we can say, well, let's take the most conservative approach. What would that look like, right? And if you're looking at the screen right now, what that would look like is maybe that blue line, that light blue line that you see over the top there, saying, hey, if this on the bottom is our age and our date, and on the left-hand side is our starting value, and that light blue line, that's a conservative approach. That's retiring later, that's spending less, that's assuming, lower inflation, then this is what that would look like, and you would end with lots of money. You have no problems. You almost don't lose any money. Your portfolio might actually grow over that time period, and everything looks great. Well, maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's not what you want. So how does that compare against, as an example, the line under it, where we run out of money right at age 100, right? And you'll see next to it, there's percentages. And so what this might do is it say, well, if you do this, if you do X, Y, Z, this is the percentage chance of success. This line is the average. This line we're looking at is the average success of what that would look like. You have a 50% chance of this. You have a 20% chance of this plan not working on the top line. You have a 100% chance of this not working if you spend all your money in the first 10 years. So now we can start to use all of that data, all of that time and energy that we put in prior to getting to this program and this system, and we can say, these are the percentage chances. This is what this would look like if X, Y, Z happened. And that at the end of the day is the goal. It's framing this in a way that we want the most amount of maximum efficiency out of the dollars, the hard-earned dollars that you've saved over a long time period. Two ways to think about it. I mentioned the presentation we were in for Thrivent right at the beginning of this presentation, where the person who was speaking was talking through all of the different analysis and all of the different charts and spreadsheets and talking us through this. And this was actually one of the slides that they put on there. And I really like this framing because, one of the things you'll find is in financial planning, there isn't really a single success or failure. Most people are very, very good at adapting. And I would argue that people are really good at it, right? So much to the point that they actually sometimes are so good at adapting, they don't think they need to plan. But I'll argue all day that the goal of financial planning is not to completely avoid disaster necessarily, because I think that's kind of a given, right? That's an obvious. We don't want that to happen. But humans would adapt way before we even get there, right? Our last resort is losing our house, and we'll find a way to make sure that doesn't happen. In reality, what I think most people come to us and say, even though it's not in these words, is, I want a plan that allows me to continue my lifestyle without having to adjust it very often, very frequently, or very much. And so this slide, I thought, captured that very well. It's just a different way to think about that. And so, let's take an 80% probability of success, okay, which is very high. And what this does is it points out two ways. So Mr. and Mrs. Client, you have an 80% probability of success in retirement. Sounds great. Mr. and Mrs. Client, you have a 20% probability of having to adjust your spending in retirement. One is framed as that success or failure, right? It's final. It's either it's going to work or it's not going to work. The second one is, I think, much more accurate. It's how willing are you to adjust your finances, your lifestyle, or your plan if things don't work out exactly as we assumed, or those parameters weren't exactly positioned in the right place. And that's what a multidimensional analysis does very, very well. And it allows us to say with confidence, okay, we've ran this scenario a lot of times through this program. We've spent a long time on the assumptions and the numbers, and what are we willing to do in the future to make sure our life looks like this? And what are we willing to do now? What sacrifices are we willing to make to increase that percentage chance of that occurring? And so this is just a good way to look at it. Most of the financial planning, I think, revolves around what are we willing to give up now to receive later, and what percentage chance can we put to that? Okay, so moving on through our process, right? The analysis is done, the path is clear. We've got a little bit of a better idea of where we're going. We've maybe even got some action items that we're working through. And so this step is called Realize. This is our third meeting, again, usually about an hour long, a couple weeks after the last one. This is where we get a lot more detailed about recommendations, right? We look at things like all of the data that we've put in, the different plans, and we say, this is what, as an advisor, right, somebody who sees people go through this regularly, somebody who has studied this data now on you, somebody who is here to provide advice, this is what I would do, right? And so it's use the data to determine the actions that will result in a fulfilling plan that has a high probability of success or not needing to adapt. And so that could be, this is the date I would start Social Security. It could be, hey, you're really, really close to retirement. I would say if you can wait that 6 months longer, you can lock in a slightly higher pension benefit because of the structure of the formula. This is how long I would wait. It might be, this is how much you've got in checking savings. This is what we need to do with it. These are the investments you hold. We need to diversify. The list goes on, but we're slowly tweaking and making changes in the financial plan to increase that probability of success and increase the chances that you don't have to adapt to a lifestyle in retirement. What else are we doing through this process, right? We've got an ideal plan, I would say. We've got a plan A, maybe even a plan A and A B. But we're also wanting to now start to uncover, okay, this is great. This has a high probability of success. We've ran it lots of different ways. We feel really, really confident in it. We've got our action items. What happens if, right? What happens if we have a death of an early spouse? What happens if there's a disability? What happens if we live too long, much longer than we've planned for? And, we need to think about that. What happens if the market really doesn't do what we want it to do, or it does better than expected? What happens if we want a late career change and we want to go into a different industry, sector, company? All these things are things that now we've got at least a plan in place. We can look at how would those variables affect that plan? Just to give you, again, without going into the technical data, because we could spend a long, long time on this, and we've got other presentations that we've hosted that go into some more of those technical items. But what would happen in the early death of a spouse? Well, if somebody's pre-retired, well, maybe there's years that we were counting on retirement contributions going in. Maybe our funding is fine. Maybe there was adequate life insurance already there. Maybe it's not a money problem. But maybe now we've got a tax problem because we've got a spouse who's single now, widowed, and they've got half the tax bracket and they've got half the standard deduction. But yet they might, if planning has been done well, have the same full income that they had when they were living for two. What happens if we have a disability? Is there proper insurance there? How long does that last? What does that look like? Are we diversified? Are we bucketed out from our investment standpoint? Are we taking into account when do we need these funds, and are they in the right bucket that allows us to not worry about whether the daily or monthly or weekly swings in the market, because we know we've got the money that we need to support us for the next 12 to 18 months in a conservative bucket. The swings are pretty minimal. The volatility is low. And our money that we're going to spend 15 years from now, it's secure somewhere else in a long-term retirement bucket. So those are some of the other things we talk about, in that latter stage of planning, understanding what your expectations are, understanding, have we thought about this stuff? Do we need to do anything different? Just to make sure we cover those areas. Lastly, is our Achieve meeting. And this one, you'll notice, doesn't have a time component to it because it's just the reality of ongoing financial planning. It means ongoing meetings and updates and flexibility. And so what, again, does that look like? It's adapting the plan. We spend a lot of time on needs versus wants, right? What are our needs? What are those parameters? What is it that we want to include in our planning? I think it's really common that the first year of planning is so much time invested in just getting the base level plan that often clients don't feel comfortable saying, this is what I want, and I've really always wanted that. But as we progress through this process, what you find is that starts to come to the table more. One really interesting thing about needs and wants as well that we talk through is if we've done our job right, we should be thinking about things a little bit different by the time we get to step 4, i.e., right, a client who says, I really want to put a $50,000 to $100,000 pool in my backyard. Well, during the qualitative stage, I would have hoped, right, one of the things that I would have identified is what retirement looks like to you is I want to be gone traveling for 9 months of the year. Well, what do we need a pool for, right? Why are we spending $50,000 to $100,000 on a pool when you've identified early on in the process through qualitative analysis and data that we're not going to use it? We want to be on a cruise ship somewhere or on a plane. We want to be traveling in retirement. Versus maybe on that analysis that we did earlier, somebody says, I'm a homebody, I spend a lot of time there. Well, now we're looking at that pool as an investment in our retirement, and we analyze that and think about that very, very differently. Okay, so we're adapting for life changes, right? We're adapting again, it's the disability, it's death, it's kids, it's weddings, it's, all the different things that come in our life. We want to be nimble, we want to be flexible, we want to be, have the ability to make changes. It's milestones in our life. So just keep that in mind. That's all things that we review on an ongoing basis, and we always tie it back to how does that fit into that original plan? Do we need to adjust it or adapt it? This one I put in here just because I know it's crucial. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, what I'm going to get asked when I propose something like this, let us know when your life changes. Let us know when something comes up. What are your milestones? Give us a call. The question that comes right after that is, well, what is that? What do those look like? Are there actually ages that happens? I can't necessarily predict out some of the personal life changes that you might go through, but what I will share with you, and this is something that has been very popular in the past, is there are some tangible dates where your life changes, right? Just based on IRS rules, based on government policy. And so I'll leave this up here. Again, you can request a copy. You can call us for a slide for us to remind you of what these are. But, age 50, we're eligible for catch-up contributions in our employer-sponsored plans. Note, even as we had these slides prepared, I realized we were missing a new rule for 2025, right? The super catch-up that just came in this year from ages 60 to 63, allowing us to contribute even more than the regular catch-up contribution in our 401k at age 50. Well, how important is that to reach out to somebody who has your plan in mind and say, hey, I just turned 50. I don't have a plan yet. Would you help me get one together? I know I can put more money away. Age 55, right? We can start accessing pre-tax funds without penalty, except for it's very, very specific strategies, right? You'll see the next one, age 59 and a half, is the penalty-free withdrawal date for most people, except for there are a couple strategies we can employ around the age 55. Like I mentioned, age 59 and a half, we can access our pre-tax funds. We can do an in-service rollover. One of the things engineers and scientists commonly have is a very big pre-tax balance or very big 401k balance because they've worked for that same government employer or they've worked for that same company for so long, and this is built up and they've never been able to access it. They've never been able to get professional investment management. They've never been able to use that as a tool for their planning. Well, at 59 and a half, you're now able to, even if you're still working, you're able to do an in-service rollover, and that asset can now become a tool. It can now get professional management. Age 62 is the earliest age you can start Social Security. Age 65 is Medicare age for most people. Age 70 is that maximum Social Security age where we wouldn't want you to wait any longer than age 70 because there's no benefit after that age. Age 70 and a half, right? Again, I don't know why the IRS likes the halves, but it seems like they're phasing that out, which is probably a good thing. They did leave one in place, at least, which is age 70 and a half qualified charitable distribution. Many of you will be familiar with required distributions, whether it's for yourself or parents. Most people don't know this, but you can give charitable dollars from your IRA and not have to report the income tax on your tax return because it's going to an eligible 501c3 nonprofit entity. So when you start having required distributions, that can be a pretty phenomenal tool for somebody who ordinarily wouldn't meet the standard deduction to be able to itemize and claim those charitable donations on their tax return. And then lastly, this again is subject to change here. At some point, it's going to go up again. It's on a schedule to go up, I think by 2030. But right now, the required minimum distribution age used to be 70.5, and it changed to 72, and now it's 73. So just some dates that I'd really encourage you to keep in mind. These are all things that doesn't have to be a big life change. It could just be something as simple as, hey, I just turned 59.5. I want to use my assets that are in my 401k, even though I'm still going to work for another 10 years. I want to use them better. I want to find out if there's something I can do with it that's better than what I'm currently doing. It could be that age 70.5 that you say, I'm 70.5. I want to do that qualified charitable distribution. I should have been planning for this a long time ago. Hey, come talk to someone about it. Let's get a plan together. Okay. So, I hope you guys enjoyed, just going through behind the scenes, some of those planning items that we go through, some of the strategy, some of the process. I really hope to hear from some of you guys after this. I hope, that some of you know somebody who could really use plans and refer them our way. But most importantly, I hope that you got a lot out of that, and that you can take some of that into your own life and say, okay, here's how they do it. They've been doing financial planning for a long, long time. Whether I'm ready for a financial advisor or not, it's great to see how that process and that strategy looks for them. And so I really hope you found value in that. Back to the bridge, I promised you we would come back to this. And, the one reason I wanted to come back to this after we've gone through the presentation is there was something listed in that historical summary of the collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that just struck me as very, very important, and is much easier to explain after you've gone through all of the analysis we just went through. Okay, and what they referred at the end of this big analysis of all the different technical problems that went wrong with the bridge, what they referred to in that commission as the root of the problem, at the end of the day, the be all and end all of the problem, and they referred to it as the blind spot, right? The engineers, the people who built the bridge, the planning commission that designed it, the architecture, everybody who was involved, they had a blind spot. They hadn't encountered this. They didn't know how to deal with it prior to this. This was a fundamental flaw in the way they approached that. And so according to the bridge historian, David B. Wellington, at this time, suspension bridge engineers, there seemed to be almost no recognition that wind created vertical movement at all. Our lesson, in order to build a plan that is suited to the environment it's built in, to make sure it's capable of lasting for a lifetime, and capable of withstanding all the future changes that might come into play, we need to, first of all, have a plan in place. We need to regularly review it, test it, and build the right amount of flexibility into that plan to make the changes when needed. A solid financial plan is not one singular success or failure, but it's a series of good decisions made over a long period of time. So with that, I'll leave you for this afternoon, whichever time of day you're watching this presentation at. I'll invite you again to just take a look at the slides, take a look at our website, give our office a call, reach out to us if you have questions. We would love to hear from you. We have offices in the Tri-Cities and Kalispell. We offer remote work with clients. Through our website, there's an opportunity to set up what's called an alignment call with one of our team members, just to make sure that that fit is right for everybody involved, and that what we offer is what you need. Again, we would just love to hear from you, and thank you so much for tuning in.